Yes. Good afternoon. Today is Monday, October the 19th, and it's time we got back to business. So let's see where we've been in this class and let's see where we're going. Now, already in studying the Greeks, we have visited Greece with Rick Steve, where it showed us the area we're talking about. And we have looked at a few notes, and then we began looking at the story of the Iliad through the movie Troy. And once again, it's important you remember the characters of the Iliad, all the way from Achilles to Hector, to King Priam, King Agamemnon, his brother Menelaus, Helen and Troy, of course, Paris and Hector, et cetera, et cetera. And we took a brief look at the story of the Odyssey. Remember that the Odyssey is a continuation of the Iliad. Troy has fallen, everybody's going home, including Ulysses. And Ulysses was the guy, one member, who had the idea of the Trojan horse, for which Poseidon wants to get back at him. And so the whole story of the Odyssey is the 10 years it took Ulysses, or Odysseus as he was called, to get from Troy back to his home in Ithaca. And, running through all sorts of obstacles, the Cyclops, the Lotus Eaters, the Sirens, and then finally coming back home and finding his home overrun with these suitors who want to, marry his wife, because he's actually been gone 13 years. And what he does to usurp them, to get rid of them, he actually ends up killing them all. When we come back together as a whole class, we are going to watch a retelling of the Odyssey. It is one of the most often retold stories. And when I say retold, they oftentimes change it up a bit. For example, there was an old movie made, about 20 years ago, called Where Is It, Horton? Called I Allow Too Many People to Take My Stuff. Well, isn't that just something? The name of the film is Cold Mountain, and it looks like I loaned it to someone, and they did not bring it back. Have no fear, though. I will get us another copy of it, because that's who I am. That makes me unhappy. Anyway, name of the film was Cold Mountain, and I'll find it one day. Even if I have to go back and buy a copy. That's not it. But yeah, forgive me for haggling with that. So yeah, that's one version of the story. The actual version we're going to watch, not now, but later, is called Oh Brother, Where Art Thou? Which I think you're going to like. I loved it. It's a good film, and it's a good story. And it's a story told really well and in an interesting manner. Once again, a good film tells an interesting story in an interesting manner. So let's begin then. Let's talk about this unit. Continue just a little bit today. Yes. By the way, that question up here, who was Mentor? Mentor, you see there, Mentor was an advisor to Ulysses. And from that name, Mentor, we get the idea that someone who advises someone else is their mentor. Yeah. All right. By 600 BC, a group of philosophers, thinkers in Greece called the Materialists postulated that all things were made of basic building blocks of the same material. Now, okay. This is very important in understanding the Greeks and in understanding their importance. And that is this. The Greeks were the first people, and once again, not all of them, the intelligent Greeks, the ones who sat around and actually tried to figure things out, like Socrates, like Pythagoras, like Plato. The Greeks were the first people to actually sit back and think, you know what? Natural phenomena, and when I say natural phenomena, I'm talking about storms, changes in weather, death, untimely death, death by disease, earthquakes, natural phenomena. The Greeks were the first people to come up with the idea that natural phenomena, instead of being caused by jealous gods or by evil spirits or by curses of witches, that natural phenomena might have natural causes. Now, the Greeks had no idea what most of those causes were, and in fact guessed many times. And what is odd is many of the ideas put forward by the Greeks were accepted as fact for a long time. For example, the geocentric theory of the universe was put forward by a Greek, the idea that the earth was the center of the universe. For example, the Galen, a Greek philosopher named Galen, Galen, thought that blood is made in the liver, which it is, then pumped by the heart to the rest of the body, which it is. But then Galen thought that the body just ate it, consumed it. You have to remember they didn't have microscopes where they could see the capillaries that make up, the blood exchange. But see, that was accepted truth. That was accepted truth until into the 17th century. Yeah. Which is one reason why, for the longest time, people would try to cure illnesses by bleeding the person. The idea was that whatever is making you sick is like a car with dirty oil, and the way to get rid of the dirty oil is to drain it out. Well, lots of people died of having their blood drained, including some guy named George Washington. Scout's honor, George Washington was bled to death. Man had a cold, bled to death. Anyway, back to the matter at hand. So yeah, these materialists postulated, that means they thought that all things were made of basic building blocks of the same materials. And you know what? They were right in that, but they weren't talking about atoms and subatomic particles and things like that. They were talking about earth, wind, fire, and later water was added. Pluralists like Empedocles, who thought the world consisted of 4 substances: earth, wind, fire, and water. While this assumption was disproved centuries later, what does the making of such a thesis statement tell us about the Greeks that was far ahead of their time? And that is this, once again, that the Greeks were thinking, that the Greeks were trying to logically understand the universe when everybody else was yelling, which. That's what made the Greeks different. They were thinking. Who was Pythagoras? Pythagoras, yeah, he was the founder of the Pythagorean theorem. A squared plus b squared equals c squared. Drives you nuts in math class, right? Very useful theorem, obviously, because it's much easier to sit in the shade and work out a mathematical formula than actually go out there in the hot sun and measure the distance. I know because I used to survey. Yeah. So, Pythagoras, his theorem. Pythagoras is also a person who was a philosopher, and he believed that a good person is disciplined and holds himself in silent restraint, not going overboard, not giving away to anger, not giving away to perpetual sadness. Yeah, and actually, does that sound familiar to than any other major religion. Actually, it sounds like Buddhism, but that's something else. The souls of the dead, he said, are reborn into new life, which you see in a lot of the major faiths of the world today. And keep in mind that many of the world's great belief systems were born during this time. Yeah, many of the world's great belief systems were born from 600 BC to about 600 AD. And we're talking about Buddhism, we're talking about Christianity, we're talking about Islam, and we're talking about the great philosophers, the great Greek philosophers. Yeah. Often called in philosophy the age of genius, this period of 1200 years, because so much of what was formulated in those 1200 years basically runs the world today. And Pythagoras also said that man is the measure of all things. You say, well, what does that mean, Mr. Horton? Well, how many feet in a mile? How many feet in a mile, Petey? Come on, tell me. How many feet in a mile? 5,280 feet in a mile. You're killing me, Petey. I want you to take this football and run every one of them. I like that now. You say, well, Mr. Horton, what does that have to do with man is the measure of all things? Well, how many feet are in a mile? Feet. What's a foot? A foot is the distance. Actually, in the old days, it was the distance from, well, the distance of a king's foot. But yeah, man is the measure of all things. And even with the more scientific measurements, everything is measured in accordance with how it compares to man's ability to perceive it. You understand? Everything is measured in accordance with your ability to perceive it. A pound, for example, or if not a pound, then a kilogram or a gram. You see, in accordance, how much does this weigh? And it gives you a unit that can be understood in the terms of mankind. So, yes, monism. Monism was another Greek philosophy of the time. It held the idea that the entire cosmos is made of one substance. Later on, this will be disproved. Okay, but once again, it proves that the Greeks were thinking. All right, Roman numeral 3. Art in early Greece is referred to as archaic, which is a term that today means old. Yeah, sure. But then borrowed heavily from the art of the Egyptians. Few Greek paintings actually still exist for the very simple reason that in the Mediterranean, anything that is made of color, as we've already seen with Rick Steves, and the Greeks loved color. They loved painting and slathering paint on everything. Anything that was of color sets in the Mediterranean sun and Mediterranean air for 2,000 years, it gets bleached white. It gets bleached down to its bare colors. So that's why. Most of the art of this time is taken from Greek urns and vases. Greek urns and vases survived and paintings did not, because Greek urns and vases, which by the way are primarily black and orange, were glazed. Greek vases and urns were not only, they were made of clay, and then after they were baked the first time, they then put a glaze on them, a sand glass glaze, and then bake them again. And that's why you do see Greek vases in existence today. You'll pardon me for a moment while I do two things. Number one, I'm going to sneeze. And I'm sorry, and I'm glad you're not here to be on the other end of that. Number two, let's go to pictures. Cincinnati. Cincinnati. Don't worry, I know. I'll find it. Maybe it's under Greek. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Here is an example of a Greek urn. Okay. Now, I want you to notice a couple of things about the Greek urns. Number one, the color. See the color? Black and orange. Number two, the Greek urns expressed balance. You say, what does that mean? Well, look, you have a central character here, but then you have two characters on either side there. It's balance. This side is black. This side is black. It's balance. Here's another example of a Greek urn. Same thing. Central figure here, figure there. Balance. But yeah, this is a Greek urn, and I saw these I saw at the Cincinnati Museum of Art. So let's get back to where we were. There, yeah. So what is the geometric technique in Greek art? Well, I just showed you. Balance. This side equals that side. If there's one over here, there's one over there. And finally today, what is the kuros? Yeah, the kuros. Pardon me. Now the kuros, we saw a lot of the kuros, not only in Rick Steve's video, but also in the film Troy, in the temples. Remember when the Greeks were sacking Troy, they broke into the temple and they pulled down all those statues? Those statues were the kuros, meaning the kuros is a model of the male, the freestanding male statue, perfect body structure, etc. And they call it the kuros. He was the basic form of Greek art. And so, well, that was not too painful, was it? Short lecture. We were able to look at a couple of things. We will continue tomorrow. And so, yeah, not too painful. Thank you all for being here.